Yo, we step up in the scene, check your engine is clean. DPF Guys got your ride smoking green. No block, no drag, just pure machine. Come show us your truck, we'll make it pristine. We just wanna know, can your diesel uphold? Bring something dirty, we'll turn it to gold. It's like this, we clean up your flow. Now your engine is gliding. It's time to hit the road.
Okay, folks, hello and welcome. Thanks so much for joining me, whether you're joining me live or in the future. Either way is awesome. Today is Sunday, December 29th. New Year's is right around the corner. Let me have a sip of my tea here. That's good. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Before we dive in, make sure you hit that subscribe button on your YouTube channel, on our YouTube channel. If you're not on YouTube right now, you can find DPF Guys by checking out youtube.com/DPF Guys. Just go to YouTube and look for DPF Guys. Look for our green logo there, so you don't miss any of our content. And if you're catching this someplace else other than YouTube, do me a favor, head over to youtube.com/DPF Guys and join the action. So I am James from DPF Guys, your go-to for diesel after treatment services. So whether you're an owner-operator with one truck, or you manage a fleet, or run a repair shop, or a truck dealership, we've got the expertise to keep you running clean and compliant. So DPF Guys handles everything with a diesel engine, from your light and medium-duty pickup trucks, of course, your heavy-duty stuff, your Volvos and Max and Peterbilts and Kenworths, etc. But we'll also do the light duty, medium duty pickup trucks, your Ram 2500s, 3500s, your Ford F-250s, 350s, 450s, and beyond. And then passenger vehicles, RVs, but also off-road equipment like your tractors, skid steers, and even the stuff that doesn't move, stationary equipment like generators, pumps, and, well, let's say wood chippers. I like to say if it has a DPF, we've got you covered. We can clean it. Call or text us at 404-999-1361 for more info. Call or text us at 404-999-1361. You got any questions while you're watching this, drop them in the chat wherever you might be, and I'll answer them live during our session. I kind of wait till the end. I've got 10 questions coming up, a quick run through those. But, please feel free to drop some questions in, and I'll definitely get to them. Let me check to see if anybody's here right now. Nobody yet, but hopefully soon. And then a quick disclaimer. Always consult your mechanic for specific issues. And any pricing discussed here is for reference only and not an official quote, because it's very easy to leave something out and the numbers we're talking about are going to be too low or too high or something. And I don't want to have you be frustrated or confused. So let's get down to business here. And question number 1 out of 10. And this is from our friend Peterson Outdoor Adventure from TikTok. And this kind of refers back to what I just talked about. So understand, we're going to talk about some numbers here. You might be watching this 5 years from now and our pricing may have changed. So bear with it. And if you have any questions about how much your actual DPF will cost to clean, make sure you give us a call or a text, 404-999-1361, and we can help you out. So the question is, what's it cost to clean a DPF filter? And I'm going to give you kind of the long answer here. So cleaning a typical DPF filter can vary depending upon who does it and where it's done and everything else and how it's done. So there are many different methods of DPF cleaning used by different companies. Some of these methods are quick and cheap, and others require more time and effort and do cost a bit more, but produce better and longer lasting results. And yes, you may be able to find a company that will blow out your DPF for $150 or even less. But half the time that company will tell you that they weren't able to successfully clean your DPF. And guess what? You got to buy a new one. Or your DPF might need additional work like baking or whatever, and cost you additional time and money. So quickly, the money that you thought would save, you'd save is not a savings whatsoever. Funny how life can do that to you. So at DPF Guys, we use a system that is partially designed by us, but more importantly, the process was designed with the cooperation of a large diesel engine manufacturer and one of the largest trucking fleets in the U.S. And, while we could definitely use the same approach as other companies and just give you a low price and then bait and switch you after the fact, we decided to give everybody the same process to ensure the best possible results for everybody. So yes, anybody, even you, can use an air compressor to blow out a DPF. I wouldn't recommend it because it's very messy, but in a pinch you could do it. And you'd be on your way. It'd be good enough to get your truck at a D-rate and get you down the road. But it really takes more than an air compressor to do it right. And by right, I mean you want to get the DPF and the DOC as clean as possible and back to new or as close to like new condition to ensure that the cleaning will last as long as possible, with the goal of getting 150, 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 more miles out of that DPF before it's got to be cleaned again. Quick as an aside, not in my script, but a lot of people will ask, how often can I clean a DPF? And you really, again, if nothing goes wrong with the engine, if it's properly cleaned, a DPF should last as long as the truck. So you really can get them clean as often as, they get dirty. If they're properly cleaned and if your engine is running, not doing anything weird upstream, bad injectors, dirty air filter, turbo issues, whatever you might have, engine's running good. I always tell people that if they come to us with, let's say, 300,000 miles on the truck, they should be able to go another 300,000 miles and get that truck cleaned, and then another 300,000 miles and get the DPF cleaned again. So, a lot of times people will come in and they'll say, well, I've got 750,000 on the truck, and I'll often tell them you have 1 million miles on it before you got to come see me again. In fact, you'll probably sell the truck before you need to get your DPF cleaned again. That's our goal. We always want to see you again, but not too soon. And then, so now also to answer your question, working with us, you will get both your DPF and DOC cleaned, your diesel oxidation catalyst. DPF stands for diesel particulate filter. And we clean the DOC and the DPF because 10% of the mass, the volume of the soot, will actually be in the DOC. And if you just clean the DPF, what happens is the improved airflow will move soot out of the DOC into your freshly cleaned DPF, which really doesn't do any damage, but it does start you off with a somewhat dirty DPF, which simply means you'll have to come back sooner than you would if you didn't get the DOC cleaned. And we want to keep you on the road as long as possible before you have to come back. All right, let's talk about pricing. Just really kind of quick and dirty. To clean a DPF is currently about $295 at our location in Atlanta, and the DOC is $125. You add those two up, that equals $420. I didn't do that on purpose. Well, I might have done it a little bit on purpose, but $420 to clean both the DPF and DOC. And keep in mind that the 125 for the DOC and the 295 for the DPF is just for the cleaning. So don't be surprised that there'll be some additional cost for gaskets and for exhaust clamps. You definitely need to replace those gaskets, and it's highly recommended that you replace the clamps to avoid any potential exhaust leaks down the road. And the clamps and gaskets can vary based upon how many you need and which ones they need. But we usually tell people to set aside an extra $300 to cover the clamps and gaskets. It's usually less than that, but if you plan on spending, say, $600 or $700 for a complete DPF and DOC cleaning, which would include all your parts, it's a pretty safe bet. Also, keep in mind that the pricing we're talking about here is for just the cleaning. We do all of our work once everything is off the truck. So you also have some cost associated with the mechanic who will take everything off. We'll do the remove, reinstallation, and reset. So he'll pull everything off the truck. We'll get everything cleaned, and then the next day, the mechanic will put everything back on the truck, hook up the computer, reset your soot levels, make sure everything's good, and you're out the door. So if you want to know more about this, call or text us at 404-999-1361, 404-999-1361 for more information. And remember, that pricing may vary. You've been warned. One more thing. The pricing I'm talking about here is for your standard DPF and DOC that you'll find in your typical Class 8 truck with a Cummins, Volvo, Mack, or PACCAR engine, also Hino, Isuzu, etc. It also pretty much applies for many of the off-road pieces of equipment. But some medium-duty trucks, like your Ford F-250s and your Ram 2500s, that genre, may require a different process because of how their DPF and DOC is designed, and that can cost about $750. So if you've got a pickup truck and want us to help you out, plan on a flat fee of $750 to get that done. And if you've got something with the Detroit engine, specifically like a Freightliner Cascadia or Western Star with the DD13 or DD15 prior to the Gen 5 trucks, they have the one-box system. And the one-box system on those Detroit engines is kind of a wonder of engineering, but it does make things a bit more expensive because the one-box has 2 DPFs and 2 DOCs and 2 SCRs, so the cost of the actual cleaning does go up a bit. And 2 of everything for the clamps and gaskets. So if you've got a Detroit, again, a Freightliner Cascadia, Western Star, something with the DD13 or DD15 engine, you're going to be spending, for the cleaning, for the parts, $1,000 to $1,700. And that includes all the necessary replacement parts. If you are curious about your specific truck and what it will cost to clean it, text or call 404-999-1361. Say it with me, 404-999-1361. Text or call us. All right. Number 2. This is one of those classic, what about diesel ships? And really, it's people kind of desperately looking for any excuse where they shouldn't have to have any sort of emission system on their vehicle. They'll say, cargo ships don't have emissions, so why should I have emissions? It's kind of a weird logic, but I hear it a lot. So what about these diesel ships? And so let's kind of look at the actual science and the numbers behind it. So you take a deleted or a pre-emission semi-truck, and that truck is going to be pumping about 1.5 grams of soot and ash, etc., into the air for every mile driven. Basically, the range is somewhere about 2 grams per mile on the high end and 1 gram per mile on the low end. So let's split the difference, make it 1.5 grams. And remember, there's 3 million trucks on the road, and those trucks every year drive about 300 billion miles, billion with a B. And you take that times the soot output that a non-emissions or deleted truck would put out, and it's, literally, a billion pounds of soot going in the air. Now, obviously, a large cargo ship is going to put more soot into the air. In fact, where a deleted or pre-emissions truck is going to put 1 or 2 grams per mile, a large cargo ship, like a big Panamax type ship, a big container ship, is going to be dumping, almost 1.2 kilos, 11,200 grams, about 4 pounds of soot per mile. And that is, again, you got to admit, that's 7,000 times more soot per mile than a deleted or pre-emission semi. So compared to soot per mile, even your deleted truck is many, many orders of magnitude, or, at least thousands of times cleaner than the cruise ship. But you got to look at it not so much, like how much soot does a cruise ship pump into the air, but you have to look at the amount of emissions per ton of cargo. And that's where things get really interesting. So a typical fully loaded cargo ship, and they're always fully loaded, they don't deadhead, they don't just cruise around the ocean empty, will haul about 44,000 metric tons of cargo. That's 97 million pounds of cargo. Pull up with that on the weigh station and see what they say. So for comparison, you need to compare the soot output per mile based on the grams of soot produced per ton of cargo hauled. You follow me so far? We're not just talking about how much soot goes into the air for every mile that something's chugging in the ocean. We're talking about that thing is chugging in the ocean and it's hauling, almost 100 million pounds of cargo. And now let's look at the grams of soot per ton of cargo. So while a cargo ship powered by heavy crude, and they're not powered by diesel, they're powered by heavy crude, I did find out that the more modern ships actually do switch to regular diesel. It'd be off-road diesel, but they switch to regular diesel when they're in port so that they pollute less and produce less soot when they're near a populated area. And they don't switch over to the heavy crude, the stuff that's, you know, thick like butter and needs to be heated up. It's almost like a wax before you can actually burn it. So yes, it'll definitely pump more soot in the air. 11,200 grams per mile versus 1.5 or 2 grams per mile for your non-emissions truck. But if you look at grams per ton of cargo, a loaded cargo ship is only putting out about a 1/4 gram of soot in the air for every mile it traveled when you look at the tons of cargo. So, so using the same equation for a fully loaded semi-truck, you are correct. Your math, the semi fully loaded semi, which is about 40 tons in the back, will produce less soot than a per ton hauled than a cargo ship at about 0.075 grams per soot per ton per mile. So let's back up here. So a cargo ship is dumping about a 1/4 gram of soot per ton per mile, and your deleted or non-emission semi is putting in 0.075, like half, a third of the soot in the air. But unlike trucks, cargo ships never run empty and are always fully loaded. And trucks can be partially loaded, or they run empty, or the deadhead, you know, or they're partially, you know, again, they're running LTL. Also, unlike trucks that run on public roads, usually through populated areas, cargo ships produce a majority of their soot pollution from very far from any population. So to answer your question, cargo ships do pollute, but you need to factor in the amount of pollution produced versus the amount of cargo carried. Plus, you need to be aware that the pollution introduced by cargo ships is far away from any people who would be affected by the particulate matter in the air, unlike trucks that are bombing down the highway. As an aside, cargo planes, on the other hand, are terrible for pollution per ton carry per mile, but I can cover that in another video. So yet another excuse to delete your truck is kind of debunked. You know, if you're like, well, I'm gonna knock a hole in my DPF because of the cargo ships, I don't, you know, that doesn't really add up. And the fact is, the cargo ships, when you actually factor in the amount of pollution they produce and how many tons they carry, they're actually fairly clean. I know, it's amazing. Okay. Number 3, from one of my favorite people on TikTok, Mr. Sweaty Poop Shoot. His question is, have you ever seen modern locomotives burn diesel? I'm a freight engineer for a class 1 locomotive, and I burn anywhere from 800 to 2,000 gallons on my 170-mile run every single day. So, so this is one of our questions from one of the friends of the DPF Guys channel, Mr. Sweaty Poop Shoot, and Mr. Shoot. You may want to get some baby powder for your condition, but I do appreciate your question. And this question got me down the rabbit hole of emissions per ton of cargo, and I was honestly shocked. I was astounded to learn that out of every single type of conveyance that hauls cargo, and that's going to be semis, crew, the passenger ships, planes, and locomotives, Mr. Poop Shoot's locomotive is 100%, without question, the greenest method of transportation of cargo out there by far. So yes, he's absolutely true. The locomotive he drives every day will burn 800 to 2,000 gallons of diesel fuel to haul freight about 170 miles, give or take. But a loaded locomotive, and they're always loaded, will normally be hauling about 4,000 tons of cargo in the train cars behind the locomotive. And it's true, a locomotive will pump out about 19.5 grams of soot into the air per mile, which is about 10 times the amount that a semi would pump out. But when you're hauling 4,000 tons, that equates to, get ready for this, 0.004875 grams of soot per mile per ton hauled. And that's roughly 0.005. I mean, basically that's the weight of a pollen grain. So amazingly enough, a locomotive with any sort of DPF on it is actually the cleanest method of carrying a load when you measure emissions per ton of cargo. And P.S., all locomotives do have some sort of EGR in them to reduce NOx, and some of the more modern locomotives reduce their emissions even further with the similar kind of SCR and DEF system that a diesel truck would have. So I did not realize until I got Mr. Sweaty's question. So thank you for that, Mr. Poop Shoot. I never thought I would say that, but there you go. Thank you, Mr. Poop Shoot. I got to get a t-shirt that says that on there. All right, what do we have for question number 5? All right. Isn't a happy engine something cool air and not forced to feed on its own farts? Honestly, asking. So honestly, I wish there were a way to reduce NOx other than the EGR cooler combined with the SCR. So, I mean, the best I can figure is the EGR cooler did come before the SCR. And the SCR stands for selective catalytic reduction, or the selective catalytic reducer. It's the part of your emission system that works with the DEF to really bring that NOx down. I think the EGR is kind of a leftover piece of emissions technology, almost like an appendix, kind of a vestigial organ in the engine. And I suspect that it will be likely replaced with a more efficient SCR and DEF delivery system in the future. And so you'd be able to get rid of the EGR cooler. That's just my opinion. I could be completely off base with that. In my opinion, the EGR cooler isn't ideal, simply due, like you said, forcing the engine to breathe its own farts. But it is what it is right now, right? But hopefully in the future, we'll have a better way to handle NOx downstream in the SCR. But until then, if your engine smelt it, it dealt it. But if you have any questions on your engine smelling its own farts or anything to do with your DPF system, of course, text or call 404-999-1361. Make sure you let us know that you saw us wherever you saw us so we know where to find you. And we can, if you have a question, we can also add it to a future episode. All right, moving on to question number 5. All right, this is from user long number from TikTok. Whatever soot you are catching and saving the world, the Chinese and the locomotives are that and back out. Nice try. Okay, so please refer to question number 3 from Mr. Poopshoot about the locomotives, which actually are amazingly the cleanest diesel-powered method of transportation out there right now. The only thing cleaner than a diesel locomotive would be a vehicle powered by electricity, which has its own myriad of issues, but I can save that for another day or listen to you fight about it in the comments below. So do not worry about locomotives. Even without a DPF, they are 16 times cleaner than your deleted truck. And FYI, much like your truck, locomotives do have an EGR, so they don't get off completely free from all emissions. Now, regarding China, what about China? You're 100% correct. And I was in China for about 2 weeks a few years ago, and the air pollution there is almost beyond description. It's really like unbelievable. People in China actually don't talk about the weather. They don't say, oh, it's going to be rainy or might be hot or it's going to be cloudy. They talk about AQI, and that's for the air quality indicator. And everybody has an app on their phone. I put an app on my phone while I was there to monitor the air quality, just like you'd have a weather app on your phone. And if the AQI gets too bad, which it does regularly, they will close schools and have people stay home from work, almost like a snow day. Also, this is the craziest thing. I started doing this after a few days myself. People in China will carry some sort of cloth or paper towel with them everywhere. And the reason they do this is anything you touch, you have to wipe before you touch it. And this includes anything you sit on, a bench, table, the railing that you touch going downstairs, because everything is covered by a layer of soot from diesel exhaust and from the coal plants. But all, diesel exhaust is the main source of the soot in China. On some days, you can barely see across the street. What was I thinking here? Oh, it's interesting. When I was in China, I was in a city called Dalian, which is in northern China, but a city of about 7 million people. And I thought all the cars parked along the side of the road were abandoned. You know how a car looks when it's been sitting in a barn or a garage, uncovered for years, and it'll have a layer of dust on it? These cars look like that. And I asked somebody about it. I'm like, why are there all of these abandoned cars along the road? And they're like, no, these were parked here this morning. And literally in a matter of just a few hours, there's a layer of soot on all of these cars. So China's no joke. And while it sucks to be them when it comes to environmental stuff, we are lucky that the crap they put in the air isn't able to make it all the way over to us, or we'd have a bad time as well. So if you do want to argue and use your sole point that, well, I should be able to saw off my DPF and delete my truck because China isn't required to have diesel emissions, I invite you to spend some time in China. Breathe the air and blow your nose and look at all the black crap that comes out when you do. I don't know about anyone else, but while you might want the US to be like China, I certainly do not. Because you're right. China has basically non-existent air quality laws, and you can see it and smell it and taste it. And it's, 100%, I've seen it myself. All right, question number 6. This is from Mr. Rafamar1313 from TikTok. How much pollution are in the discarded DEF drugs going into the landfills? So, based upon this question, I would say you are right, and I appreciate your intense concern for the environment. And I sincerely hope you are busy writing letters and working diligently with your legislators to make DEF drugs illegal. In fact, since you took the time to make this comment, I'm assuming that you're fighting tirelessly against the waste and environmental impact of single-use packaging for DEF. I agree. It's the DEF is in a jug. The jug is fairly thick plastic. It's got a nozzle. It's got it's in a cardboard box. It's a pretty from a landfill standpoint, from a garbage standpoint, it's pretty impactful. I don't disagree. Which is why I recommend purchasing DEF at the pump to reduce the impact of DEF packaging on the environment, or getting DEF in bulk if you happen to have a few trucks and you can consume the DEF in a reasonable amount of time, and keep it at a temperature that is, basically under 77 degrees Fahrenheit, and keep it out of the sun. So, of course, this comment, I hate to think it, could be just commenting as some sort of, yeah, but what about fill in the blank, and to justify your own desire to defeat your emission system so you can roll coal up and down the road wherever you go. But since I don't know this person personally, I'll assume that he is busy hugging trees and paying homage to Greta Thunberg with his anti-DEF jug stance. If you want to complain about DEF jugs, text me at 404-999-1361. But seriously, if you can get fresh DEF bulk at the pump, it definitely is the right way to do it. It's cheaper and definitely, definitely, no pun intended, is better for the environment, and better for everything involved with making anything you can do to reduce packaging, whatever you're doing, is not a bad idea. All right, let's go to question number 7. Concrete Shooter. I wonder if he's related to Sweaty Poop Shooter from TikTok. What happens to all the soot in the DPF when you clean the DPF? What do you do with the soot? I really do not think it's worth the cost. So the 20,000 people a year who are dying in the U.S. due to complications from long-term exposure to diesel emissions may agree with you. Disagree with you, I should say, may disagree with you. Also, if there weren't real health issues due to diesel emissions. Diesel exhaust soot is just a mess. As I mentioned earlier, I spent time in China, and the diesel soot was absolutely everywhere. And honestly, it was like that in the U.S. not too long ago. 2005, 6, 7, before the emissions came into effect. Remember the black snow in the winter? If you're from a part of the country that has snow, and even though I'm sure you'd love nothing more than be able to saw off your diesel emissions, or maybe you already have, I'm certain you wouldn't want to go back to how nasty the air was prior to 2007 or so. What does happen to the soot we remove from the DPF and safely capture? We recycle it, and it goes into 100 different uses, ranging from carbon black in tires to an additive for cement to make the cement stronger, to even things like steel manufacturing and much, much more. But I do appreciate your question. If anybody else has a question for me, text me 404-999-1361, 404-999-1361. I would love to hear from you. All right, we're getting to the end here. Question number 8. What happens when the truck regens? This is, I really appreciate this question. This is an excellent question. And I think it's actually a very interesting process that people are just simply not really clear on. So let me do my best to break this down and explain it. So what happens when the truck regens? And this is going to be on whether you're, a big truck, on a little truck, on a skid steer, whatever it might be. Regeneration does need to happen on occasion. So a DPF, a diesel particulate filter, is just that, a filter, like a coffee filter or a vacuum cleaner filter or an air filter in your house, or whatever else you might have. It just sits there and catches soot and ash from the engine. Now, if diesel combustion was 100% efficient and every single tiny drop of diesel fuel was burned and turned into energy that moved the truck, guess what? There wouldn't be anything left other than carbon dioxide. But unfortunately, we do not live in a perfect world, and there are inefficiencies in the combustion process that leave unburned fuel behind. And that unburned fuel is left behind. The waste is soot. And that's why it's not just elemental carbon that can just go in the atmosphere. It's actually unburned diesel fuel. It's actually like when the soot gets into the soil and everything else, it's actually like mixing diesel fuel into the soil. So what happens is, your combustion process is not 100% efficient, and the portion of the diesel fuel that is not burnt is left over as soot that goes downstream and gets trapped in the DPF, so it doesn't leave your stack or tailpipe and get into the atmosphere where it can then be breathed and cause a trouble. So basically, your typical big truck is going to be, that engine's going to be dumping out about 1 or 2 grams of soot for every mile that truck is driving. Of course, smaller engines produce less, bigger engines produce more. Let's say, 1 or 2 grams per mile. And if with the amount of miles these trucks go, if all you did was just capture that soot, you would have just this enormous bag of black soot that, what are you going to do with it, right? 1 or 2 grams per mile, you drive 100,000 miles per year. I mean, you're talking, thousands of kilos of soot. So you got to do something with it. Gets trapped in the DPF. And if you didn't do something, if you didn't regenerate that DPF, it would build up very quickly and fill the filter if it wasn't some way to burn it off and convert it to gases and a tiny bit of ash. So let's get into the process. A regen does exactly that. It takes the soot, which is mostly unburned diesel fuel, and burns it into gases and a little bit of ash. The remaining ash, which is usually less than 1% of the weight of that soot, will remain trapped in the DPF. And the gases are gases, so they pass through the DPF filter and then are processed by the SCR, the selective catalytic reducer, and is converted into nitrogen and water, and from that goes in the atmosphere. But here's what a regen does, or how it does it. The normal engine exhaust temperatures are hot, but not quite hot enough. A normal engine is going to have, a normal warm engine is going to be pumping out exhaust that's 700 or 800 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's definitely toasty, but not hot enough to actually burn the soot out of the DPF. That soot requires about 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit to burn into gases and ash during the regen process. So how does that regen work? So a typical automatic regen, a passive regen, is triggered when a pressure differential sensor, in other words, the difference between the inlet of the DPF and the outlet of the DPF, the sensor detects that the exhaust is not flowing as well as it should through the filter because of the buildup of soot, and it's indicating that the soot is plugging it up. So the ACM, or the after treatment control module, that's the computer that manages your emissions, senses this, picks that up, and says, you know, the exhaust is having a little trouble getting through the DPF. I would like a regen now. So it sends a message to the ECM, the engine control module, and the ECM begins a passive regen. And how the regen works is the truck will add a bit of unburned diesel, it's also called hydrocarbon, to the exhaust system, either through an extra fuel injector just after the turbo, and that's called the 7th injector, or it's also known as the hydrocarbon doser if you want to get fancy about it, or in some engines, some of the Cummins engines, the additional fuel is added directly into the cylinder through the fuel injector during the exhaust stroke. But either way, this unburned fuel just works its way down the exhaust stream and heads down to where it hits the DOC, or the diesel oxidation catalyst, also called a catalyst or a CAT or a DOC, and where it passes over a layer of nanoparticles of precious metals. And those precious metals are usually a combination of 3 very expensive metals: platinum, palladium, and rhodium. And of those 3, platinum is actually the cheapest one at about $1,000 an ounce right now, 1,700, 900. Platinum's been a bit down. And the rhodium, when I started doing this, was over $18,000 an ounce. I do think that's down as well, probably about $8,000 or $9,000. But these precious metals react with the unburned diesel fuel in an exothermic reaction, which produces a boost of heat. And even though the DOC might only be this big, you know, that's only like just a few inches, in that few inches, as the exhaust flows through there and reacts in the unburned hydrocarbon, unburned diesel in the exhaust stream, touches those nanoparticles of platinum, palladium, and rhodium, it immediately boosts that exhaust temperature up to 900 to 1,000, 1,100 degrees Fahrenheit, which is needed to burn off the soot. So this process continues, burns the soot, burns the soot, burns the soot, until the soot is all burned off and converted to gases, which are processed by the SCR downstream. And it does leave a little bit of ash behind, and that ash gets trapped in the DPF. And once that's done, it detects that the pressure levels have returned to a happy differential pressure level in the DPF, and it stops the regen and waits until the next time a regen is needed, when it repeats. This process will keep the DPF flowing well until it finally gets full enough of ash where it needs to be cleaned. And this is where we come in to do what we do. So we clean everything out of that DPF until it's like new again and can be put back on the truck. How often should you get your DPF cleaned? How much ash can the DPF hold? It varies from truck to truck to truck. But normally it can hold 150,000 to maybe 500,000 miles worth of ash. Some people push it way past that. You really don't want to do that because your truck will derate and will get stuck out in the middle of nowhere someplace. But you can go 150,000, 200,000, 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 between cleanings, which is pretty amazing. But no, a regen does not magically make everything just go away. It does convert the soot. It does break it down, but eventually, over time, that what's left, which is the ash, needs to be taken out. Also, a regen does not just put soot in the air. Everything is captured by the DPF. I often hear that, like, well, what's the sense? A regen just puts all the smoke in the air. It doesn't. If you're seeing any sort of smoke come out of your stack or tailpipe, that means that something is not quite right. If it's white smoke, it might be an overdosing of DEF, your diesel emissions fluid. It might be a coolant leak. If it's black smoke, you definitely have something going wrong in the engine, and your DPF is not DPFing anymore. It's basically broken, cracked, letting everything fly right through. So that's definitely a red flag or a black flag. But thanks for your question. This is a good one. I love answering these. And if anybody else has any other regen questions, guess what? Let me know by sending a text to 404-999-1361. Just let me know I've got some trouble and you would like me to help you sort it out. I will do my best to do that in a relatively timely fashion. Sometimes it takes me a little bit to get back to you on this, but we welcome your calls and welcome your text messages. Okay, we're almost done. We're up to number 9. And this is from Mr. Brian Montgomery TikTok, also from TikTok. And I had a video where I was showing what we do with the waste soot that we get out of the system. And there was a label on the barrel we used to ship it in for recycling that said non-hazardous. So Mr. Montgomery is saying, well, shoot, man, if it's not hazardous, why are we trapping it in the first place? Just let it fly. So what you need to understand is the definition of hazardous. So by hazardous, we're talking about transportation and placarding designation. Diesel soot's not flammable, it's not corrosive, not poisonous as in like an insecticide or whatever, but it is definitely a hazard to breathe and in the environment. So it needs to be handled properly when we work with it, but it's perfectly shaped to perfectly safe to ship. So yes, it's you don't want to breathe it, you don't want to get it in the air, you want to handle it very carefully and safely. But once it's in the barrel and in the back of a truck, it doesn't need to be handled like hazardous material like you would if it was a vat or a barrel of acid or pesticide or some sort of explosive. I hope that helps. Okay, question number 10. And anybody who has asked a question from TikTok or Facebook or YouTube while I'm doing this, I will get back to you as soon as I get done through question number 10 from our friend Nacho Man from TikTok. How many grams of ammonia per mile from SCR? This is another one where people ask these questions hoping to catch me. Like, yeah, well, it's, what about? Always the famous what about. So the answer to his question, which is how many grams of ammonia per mile does a truck produce? And the answer is, drum roll, 0 grams of ammonia. Now, yes, ammonia is created during the catalyzation process of the NOx. What happens is after the exhaust passes through the DPF, it's clean. There's no more dirt, no more soot, no more particulate matter in it. So it's clear, it's clean, but there's still invisible NOx. There's still, and the NOx is really causes asthma, believe it or not, causes heart disease, causes smog. It's pretty noxious. So what happens is the exhaust comes out of the DPF. It passes into different terms for this: the mixing chamber, the decomposition chamber, the decomp chamber. But that's a part of your exhaust system where the hot exhaust comes in. There's kind of a spiral configuration here, one way or another, which the DEF sprays in, and that turbulent mixing motion inside the decomp chamber burns off the water that's part of the DEF and allows the NOx from your exhaust and the urea, the nitrogen that's left in the DEF to mix, and it hits stage 1 of the SCR. If you ever look inside an SCR, you actually see there's 2 components in it, 2 things that are kind of these identical pieces of ceramic. Cordierite is what the material is, and it hits the first one. So what it's going to do is that the DEF and the NOx mix and hit the first part of the SCR catalyst, and that's exactly what happens. It turns it into ammonia, which is NH3, 1 nitrogen and 3 hydrogens. And so you're right, there's your ammonia. but it stays ammonia for about an inch and a half, and then it hits stage 2, and that is called the ammonia slip catalyst. And that's the part of the SCR that takes that ammonia and turns it into, it breaks down the NH3, the ammonia, the nitrogen and the hydrogens, and converts it to just nitrogen, which makes up 80% of the air you breathe, and water, H2O. And that's all that comes out of the exhaust pipe. But yes, I mean, there is CO2, carbon dioxide. That CO2 is the byproduct of any sort of combustion, including the combustion that happens in your body while you digest your food. You're breaking down sugars and things like that, turning it into carbon dioxide whenever you breathe out. The plants do breathe that in. They break off the oxygen. They throw away the oxygen like a waste product, and then use the carbon to make their leaves and their trunks and things like that. So 0 grams of ammonia should come out of your truck. So if you smell ammonia behind your truck or around your truck, there is something wrong with your SCR. You should not smell ammonia. Now, you might get a whiff of it, as things are warming up or whatever, but if you smell a strong ammonia smell, it's telling you that there's something not going right with your SCR. It might be dosing too much DEF. I mean, something's not right. So 0 ammonia gets in the atmosphere from your SCR. So there you go, man. Let me quick check to see if any comments came in. Oh, yes. Oh man, this is a beautiful thing. Let me pull this on screen here. I'm going to turn this one off so I'm not distracting you. Okay, so the 2027 EPA regulations are going to require a GPF, a gasoline particulate filter. I never thought that there was really an issue with soot off of a gasoline engine, but if it's good, it can get better, I guess. And I don't know. My hunch, though, our marketing department might try to spin something out of this to get, to get some business out of the GPF market. And again, gasoline particulate filter. But I think much like a catalytic converter, I think the gasoline particulate filter is probably designed to be a 0 maintenance component. And don't quote me on this. I also heard that the GPF filter itself is going to be a $100 or a $50, $150, less than $200 part. So I am guessing that it's not going to be something that requires cleaning. And if it ever does, it's probably due to some sort of issue in the engine. And it would just be replaced instead of cleaned. Now, it could be wrong. Because if these things do cost a bunch of money, then it would make sense to clean them. But if they're only $50 or $100, it would obviously be better, just replace it. So, that's a great question. I don't know the exact answer on it. My hunch is telling me that I don't think cleaning will be required. And it's, it'll be almost like an oil filter where you can just replace it. But the jury is still out. So I'm not sure what the technology exactly looks like. But as soon as I know, I will let you know. And if you have any information for me, I'd be more than happy to take a peek at it. So thank you very much for your question. I really appreciate that. If anybody has any questions they want to text in, please text us at 404-999-1361, 404-999-1361. And so there you have it, your questions, my answers, some of them a little bit snarky, but that's just how I roll. Thank you everybody for watching live or watching in the future. Please leave your questions or comments below, down, overside, above, wherever it might be. If you want to text us a question, 404-999-1361, please feel free to text or call us. And I'll be back here next week to answer more of your questions. And remember, subscribe to DPF Guys on YouTube, DPF Guys. Just look for DPF Guys on YouTube. Like our Facebook page. And of course, if you're not following us on TikTok, why the heck not? Do that, because that's where a lot of the fun happens. And thank you for watching, and see you next week.
haze, just clear skies ahead. With DPF guys, your exhaust game's on tread. We got the tools, the skills, the might to get your truck rolling clean into the night. Throttle up, feel that clean airflow. Our service so slick, your ride seals the show. DPF guys, we got the fit so fine. Hit the road with confidence, now the world's your shrine. Bring in that rig, let's get on track.